Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday afternoon. I'd like to welcome my first guest in, Renn, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and expert in urban affairs. Renn, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, of course, as an expert in urbanism, no bigger topic this week than the announcement of Amazon HQ2 going to Crystal City, Virginia, and Long Island City. Now, it had been rumored leading up to the announcement this week that these were going to be the two picks. Let's just start with that big question. Why these two cities?
Well, it's an interesting question. They were sort of the obvious places that Amazon would have gone all along. People were thinking if you just wanted access to talent and the usual in tech markets, you would just go into New York or D.C. or a place like that, maybe Boston, but I think most people are putting D.C. very close at the beginning because he owns the Washington Post, has a house there, he's a big defense contractor, and then of course New York is what it is. And the company went through this 14-month song and dance routine, which is now just getting pounded from everybody, left, right, and center. I've never seen so much universal condemnation of almost anything as of this Amazon HQ2. I mean, it's being called a scam, a stunt, a bait and switch. People are saying it should be illegal. It's kind of crazy. And Amazon themselves almost seem to want to try to bury it a little bit because they leaked the names the evening before the election last week to sort of maybe deflect a little bit of the criticism.
If that's not a Friday afternoon news drop, I mean that's the biggest, the night before the election news drop.
Right.
And you talk about the outrage, Renn. Was it really by lieu of just the incentives and everything that all these cities were doing to court Amazon to come in from an economic perspective?
Well, one of the things that really distinguished this was that it was such an incredibly public process. I mean, people found out about it when Amazon issued essentially a press release. And this entire thing was conducted essentially, in a sense, in the public eye. And then Amazon let it be known that they were doing this, that they'd gotten 238 responses and that they'd cut it to 20 and all of this. And so a lot of other ones is generally much more low-key behind the scenes. Now, of course, the discussions that were going on with the cities were hush-hush.
Yeah.
Nobody knew exactly what was happening there. But everybody could see, almost from the word go, that Amazon was gearing up to essentially rake all these communities over the coals for subsidies. And that's basically what happened. So I think the fact that it was such a publicly conducted process designed in part to extract gigantic subsidies, and then they just went with the places people would have listed off the top of their head immediately without any bake-off, and it really prompted a lot of anger.
And let's talk a little bit about that as well. You talk about, and we saw it here, Rhode Island did put in an application as well, you know, as you said, maybe perhaps playing off locations against each other for those subsidies. There's also been some talk that by doing this, Amazon had basically market research done for them for all of these cities around the country. Let's talk a little bit about that. Did the actual application process perhaps serve to benefit Amazon as well?
Well, a lot of people are saying that essentially every city at their own expense compiled a very large, thick dossier on all of their capabilities and everything that they have, including sites, etc. And they basically showed their hand about what they were also willing to do for Amazon in the future. So they can always circle back to any of these places and cite future things, at a future date. I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. You know, they've already have warehouses all over the country. It wouldn't necessarily be a bad move for them politically to start opening offices in these various cities, putting very specific functions there that tap into the local labor force or whatever specific unique things are there. Just to try to be like the old military industrial complex. You want to have like a piece of this weapons program manufactured in every district. I think if I were Amazon, I would want to have some white collar employees in a lot of red states and a lot of different districts given a lot of the antitrust stuff that's being always talked about Silicon Valley in general.
And let's talk a little bit about that because obviously one of the facets of Amazon that folks are certainly keeping a close eye on, Amazon Go, really talking about sort of the role of being able to have sort of people-less stores, if you will. How much of that is going to impact places around the country if you, again, have these sort of Amazon outposts without people? I mean, are you still going to need that people element if there's an issue pertaining to anything, whether it's on the consumer side, whether it's on the business side, whether it's on the political side? Is that really going to be necessary for Amazon to actually have boots on the ground?
Amazon is experimenting with these Go stores. I haven't shopped at one. One of my friends has. He says it's pretty cool. They also own Whole Foods now. They've opened physical bookstores, including one down the street from me at Time Warner Center. So what the future of retail is with Amazon specifically is not entirely clear, but it is clear that efficiencies in every industry are here to stay. There's this lunch place called Eatsa. This sort of like this automat concept again. You order and your food comes out of a slot in the wall, and there's no one in the actual restaurant. There are people in the back preparing your meal, but the whole idea is to kind of get you used to dealing with completely automated systems, self-checkouts. So there's just a lot more coming here, regardless of Amazon or not. Just additional technology intruding into every area of our lives. Whether it can get better or not is an interesting question. I don't know that it always is, but it's coming whether we want it or not.
Whether we want it or not. Eatsa sounds certainly a little Jetsonian, maybe, if you will.
Yeah.
But let's go back. I mean, we've seen the press around the country. We've seen elected officials, again, as you said, with that anger, if you will, with the amount of subsidies paid out to a corporate giant like Amazon. But what is the downside for Amazon? How does the average consumer, I mean, are they such a behemoth that they simply deflect this and move on? Is there any sort of possibility for backlash, and what would that even look like?
Well, I don't see how anyone at the state or local level has much leverage over Amazon. I would say that, I don't hear necessarily a lot of government officials in the chorus. They're all hoping for Amazon business at some point. It's a lot of pundits and economists and people of that type, journalists, who are really giving them the pounding. I think the elected officials are more circumspect. There's definitely going to be really much more focus on Silicon Valley at the federal level at some point, because these companies control just enormous market share. Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Twitter, these companies essentially dominate the markets that they're in. And so, for example, what if Amazon decides they're not going to sell your book, right? If they're not going to sell the Kate Nagel book,
then where do I go? I've got no place to go.
Where do you go after that? And so there's already been some controversies over them pulling books and disputes with publishers and things of that nature. And so the dominance of these companies is going to continue to attract scrutiny on both the left and the right in terms of free speech on the internet and many things. And so certainly these types of behaviors can't be necessarily winning Jeff Bezos too many friends on the Hill, for example.
Well, we'll see, what happens in D.C., but let's talk about sort of that boots on the ground perspective, again, that choice for Long Island City and for Crystal City as well. Perhaps let's even start back in Seattle. Do you think that Amazon has learned some lessons? Let's start with that Seattle example of what occurred out there and what you as an urban expert are looking for as they set up shop in New York and Virginia.
Yeah, well, it's when I was analyzing this, I said a lot of it comes down to some of the preferences that they have as a company. For example, how cost sensitive are they? They're a retailer. They're known for being pretty cost sensitive. Well, what they showed was we actually don't care about cost at all. We want to be in that highest talent market. Another question is whether they wanted to be essentially the biggest game in town in the way that they are in Seattle. I think it was the Seattle Times called that city the world's largest company town. Amazon really has a lot of dominant share of office space and such in the city proper. So part of the HQ2 process or 2, 3, 4, however many they're going to be, seemed to be that essentially Amazon was running out of room to grow in Seattle. They're going to be able to continue to grow there, but prices had gone through the roof. It was just hard to scale beyond the 40,000, which is an insane number of employees in the region. So one of the questions I had was whether they wanted to go someplace where they could essentially dominate the local market, or did they want to go someplace where they were going to be one player among others? And they clearly chose the latter. I mean, they didn't go to a place like Columbus, Ohio, where they could have essentially built Seattle too. They went to a place like New York, where, I mean, there have been over 500,000 jobs created in New York just in the last few years. 25,000 jobs is almost kind of a rounding error in New York City in terms of jobs. New York is just such a gigantic market. And again, in D.C., the federal government is so huge. So they obviously did not want to be that single all-dominant player, and that probably played a role. And then they probably realized, look, it's just hard to hire very, very huge numbers of really highly talented people other than in the very largest markets. Yep. And so that really plays to the advantage of these, metro areas like D.C. and New York that are more than 5 million people. So they just, that's just, it takes a huge scale labor market like that in order to be able to bring in that many people. And not only just be able to bring in that many people, but you're constantly turning over. So you have to constantly be bringing in new ones. And so that was another maybe lesson learned there.
And let's talk a little bit about each of those separate markets, Long Island City and Crystal City in Northern Virginia. As we were chatting about before you came on, I know some folks down in Northern Virginia. Some are excited, some have a lot of concerns because the traffic and density down there is already very high to begin with. If, again, that Crystal City area just outside, right off the metro there in D.C., I mean, how do you expect this to fit into the fabric of an already booming economy down there and an already a busy one, and how that sort of, how the city and the infrastructure and transportation, I mean, will they be busting at the seams?
Yeah, that area is served by the metro system. Yeah, it is a stop on the Virginia Railway Express, the commuter rail as well. It's right next to the airport. It has highway access. You're right that D.C. is an expensive, congested market. It'll be interesting to see how things turn out. But again, it's already a large market, and there are, like, for example, if you just look at how many cars per day are on the road on I-95 through downtown Providence, it's way more than 25,000. So you're well over 100,000. It's just lots and lots of cars. So even in a market like Providence, in terms of highway traffic, once you look at people who are getting there by car, by commuter rail, by metro, it's probably going to have an impact. How big of an impact, I don't know. There's already a massive number of jobs in Arlington. Crystal City's a neighborhood in Arlington County, and we'll just have to see how it turns out there. Again, New York already feeling the strains on its transit system, some of which because of the way that it's getting old and breaking down a lot, similar to D.C. But again, New York, if it's one thing New York has, it's the scale and the ability to do things that other places can't do. So I think New York is going to be able to figure out how to grow the city to accommodate that.
And with the announcement, as we talked about the Friday afternoon joke, the Monday afternoon before the election announcement, studying when big companies come in places, Amazon has made the announcement, but what do we expect time frame wise? I mean, they've known this is where they want to be. I mean, how quickly do we expect these sort of sim cities to be popping up and really have their footprint established in each of these markets?
That's a good question. I don't know. We'll have to see. I mean, and there's no guarantee that they will actually create all of these jobs, or it will turn out to be, exactly what they thought it would be. This is sort of a statement of intent.
Yep.
And who knows what'll happen. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes.
And also, let's talk a little bit about Amazon back in Seattle, about that corporate community partner role, if you will, and sort of that, because as you said, that big company town. Let's talk a little bit about the town-gown relations. I mean, has Amazon been known to be a good community partner in Seattle, and what do we expect? Again, this behemoth of a company, hands out looking for subsidies. As you said, states and cities more than willing to say, yes, we'll give you anything you want to come here. But what does Amazon give back to the communities that it's in, besides jobs and economic development?
Well, that's a good question. I really don't know what they do in Seattle. I mean, I haven't heard them as having a great reputation for philanthropy of any sort. I think it was Jeff Bezos who said he was going to put all of his money into space exploration because he couldn't think of anything else to do with it. In a lot of ways, the tech people have never been known for the traditional local philanthropy of previous generations of rich people who would fund hospitals and the opera and arts organizations and things like that. They seem to be more interested in third world issues or other things. So from a philanthropic perspective, I really don't know what Amazon's doing there. Certainly there's a lot of tensions in the community, but in a sense that's just fashionable. It's like a fashionable thing to be anti-corporate, in these cities, even though probably some way, shape, or form you directly or indirectly get your money from one of said corporations. But I think it's going to be something. There is this idea that this perception that Amazon is something that extracts things out of these communities but doesn't really contribute back. And so coming into places with a lot of media, and a lot of very powerful media, and large activist communities, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out in D.C. and in New York. And
considering one market is very much tied, in fact, to Amazon and Bezos. So, as you mentioned, going back to the very beginning when cities were putting in their applications and folks thought who might be that top 5, and of course New York and that D.C. area would certainly have been on it. What are you going to be looking at, Aaron, from that urban expert, urban analyst role as we look to see what happens now? Does Amazon fulfill what it had said it could possibly do? And what are the other factors that you're looking at?
Well, I'm very interested in looking at the divergence of communities. We've really seen that larger cities of more than 1 million metro have been outperforming smaller ones in terms of job growth. We've also seen that the elite superstar cities, the San Franciscos, the Bostons, D.C., Seattle, New York, have been disproportionately receiving the lion's share of the high-end business. There's a lot of businesses going elsewhere, and there's certainly very thriving, successful cities like Nashville, which is getting 5,000 employees, Dallas. But these coastal superstar cities have really been sucking in the highest of high-value things. And so it'll be interesting to me to see how that dynamic plays out. I thought this would be an interesting test. I thought maybe this was just wishful thinking on my part as a Midwesterner. I thought that this would be the ideal case study for picking an interior city because they're cheaper, they're lower cost, and they would be desperate. It would probably be hard to grow in one of these coastal markets, which are already, maybe essentially full in a lot of ways. But I think what we've now seen is they're not full. People don't care about the congestion or the cost. They want to be in these big coastal markets. And I don't think that's healthy for America. So how we adapt to that is going to be a huge challenge.
Well, we'll continue to watch what you have to write, of course, Aaron Renn. And, of course, we always appreciate being able to pick your brain here as a regular contributor and guest on Go Local Live. So I appreciate your taking the time to Skype in from the Manhattan Institute.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, thanks, Aaron Renn. We're going to let you go down to New York, and we're going to get a little closer here to Rhode Island with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Don't go anywhere.